Okie dokie. Very warm welcome, everyone. Let's get cracking. Very warm welcome to FSC Connect on the first day on level 1, which is absolutely fantastic. I think New Zealand's done an unbelievable job. And I guess the conversation today is to determine and to discuss and to tease out what's actually changed. What have we done that, and what are we doing that makes our life, our work, our play, our connections, our connectivity, our business ideas change as we kind of go through 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, and then ultimately, hopefully, to more open borders. So to join us in this conversation, we have a fantastic group of people with a bunch of diverse expertise. We have Jeremy Muir, who's partner at Minter Ellison Rudd. So welcome, Jeremy. We have Leighton Roberts, who is one of the co-founders of Sharesies. We have James Brown, who's a GM of FinTech New Zealand, and we have Michael Hughes, who is the Manager of Supervision at the Financial Markets Authority. So welcome, gents, and delighted to have this discussion. The way we're going to do this, as we do with most of our conversations, is we're going to just open the batting with a discussion from each of the panelists with 2 questions, I guess. We've now gone from pre-COVID to now out the other end at level 1. New Zealand has done fantastically. How have you managed, and what's changed for you with a personal and a professional perspective? So we'll do that for 2 minutes, with each of the panelists. To the people on the other end watching this, you have your chat button and your Q&A button. We'd love to respond to any of your questions as we go through this conversation. But perhaps to open the batting and to lead us off, we might go to Jeremy Muir. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hi, Richard. Hi, everyone on the out there in webinar land. It's very nice to be here and here with the rest of the panel, who I all know very well. Look, so what did we learn as a firm during the lockdown, during the various levels? I think we learned that, thankfully, the tech worked. So, all of our investment in systems and processes and training worked, and we found that we could actually disperse remotely, but yet maintain sort of team structures and serve clients. So, that was a really good lesson, and I think we were very pleased, as I think a lot of people out there were, to realize that there was so much that we could do without having to be in the office. It's nice to be back. Missed my picture of John Coltrane, bit of a spiritual guide. But it is good to be here and to sort of see people in person. But I think what we will take out of it in the long term is a different approach to work generally. We already had been having lots of discussions around flex, remote working, and just generally looking after our people before we went into lockdown. So our HR director, Christine Brotherton, we actually hired away from Guardian Trust, where she had worked on the 4-day week. So we'd obviously made that a bit of a focus for ourselves as well. So what we're looking at now is how we reconfigure our flex policies to use the learnings that, to use a terrible word, as to how we can work together without necessarily being in the same place. So that's been good. We've also learned that many of our clients are at various stages of resilience. So some have obviously been in positions where they have been able to thrive throughout the COVID crisis to date. And I think we still have to acknowledge that there's a lot still to come. So just yesterday, I think the World Health Organization announced that we'd had the largest ever set of new cases in a given day worldwide, so well over 100,000 cases. So although things are looking good and better in New Zealand, it's still difficult out there, and that certainly affects a lot of businesses here. But a lot of clients here have found that the wall-to-wall digital that people have had in their homes has meant, particularly in fintech and financial services, that there are new ways for people to actually experience products, and I think it's played into the direction of travel that we've all been on anyway. So I think that's been really interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about that some more. As a personal matter, I've learned that there are several hundred different types of video conferencing software, and the volume control and settings as to where the mic is coming out of is different on all of them. And that my beard is grayer than my hair, which is good because I can finally look distinguished. But happy to pass on that note.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yeah, the interesting things through lockdown. What have we learned? James Brown, what have we learned?
Thanks for the invite, Richard. Great to be here as part of the discussion. And yeah, Jeremy's not the only person I've seen with very interesting facial hair during this period. I did do it for myself for about 3 weeks, but then the paperwork for divorce was subtly left on the dining room table, so I took that as a small hint to maybe go back to shaving. I mean, what have we learned? I mean, we've learned the fact that it's a little bit of a shame to some extent that it's actually taken a global pandemic to actually move into the world of agility on mass adoption. Technology, as Jeremy's mentioned, there's lots of platforms that were always out there. I mean, you know, in some organizations and institutions have used them and used them very effectively even before COVID was a thing. But then we move into a situation where the whole country, and indeed to some extent the world, was actually in lockdown. So, you know, a lot of people would have been uneasy. What is Zoom? How secure is Zoom? You know, Microsoft Teams, Blue Jeans, all these types of other things. And actually, you know, where and what happens to that information? If it is recorded, where does it go? Who owns it? And all the sort of the data conversations that go with that. But I think what we've recognised is that the tech sector has stood up pretty well. We've got to bear in mind and we've got to be sympathetic that people have lost their lives and people have definitely lost their jobs, and we're probably only at the start of that conversation, as Jeremy alluded to. But I think that the tech sector has definitely got a role to play in actually standing up parts of our economy. And, you know, I've mentioned that in sort of recent weeks in some of the interviews and press releases that I've done, that we've got the opportunity to help redeploy. We've got the opportunity to actually, and we've proven that we can do it through lockdown, that actually we can still launch new products to market, both locally, and you mentioned just as we started, regionally and globally. So it's a characteristic. I'm optimistic about the future. As long as we can get our ducks in a line, I think that the tech sector, and predominantly fintech and the other techs, could definitely play a lead role in the generation of productivity, monitoring outputs as opposed to inputs and what we've done previously. But also, as Jeremy mentioned, that remote concept of working and how that whole landscape is just going to really going to change. And we also saw quite a bit of press, PR, and comms from the Prime Minister actually the other week, you know, talking about the sort of the more adoptive measure into the 4-day week. And some people will know that I'm the 4-day or one of the 4-day week ambassadors for New Zealand. So certainly a conversation I'd like to go into in great detail, but, you know, great to be here. Looking forward to the discussion. Thanks again, Richard.
Awesome. Thanks, James. Michael, from your perspective, what have we learned and how's the last 3-4 months been for you personally, but also with your FMA representative hat on?
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and good afternoon, everyone. Look, certainly unprecedented times. You know, from an FMA perspective, we're very fortunate that we have a very modern technology suite. So the move into level 4 was relatively seamless. We all became very adept at utilising Skype for Business or Microsoft Teams. I guess, you know, during the period of COVID, as an organisation, we certainly, I believe, we lived up to our values of being agile. We established a banner page, COVID-19, where we worked very closely with a lot of the industry to have a look at some of the pressures that they were facing. So such things as, you know, granting temporary exemptions to reporting and other forms of regulatory relief. Look, certainly from an engagement perspective, that was, a good opportunity for us to reach out digitally. So whether through Skype or through certainly Microsoft Teams. I guess one of our observations very, very early on was, I think, the first week on the level 4 when the internet certainly spiked. It was back to some of the old copper wires and the 0800 numbers. But then I think we quickly realised how to go through and maximise technology. So look, if you may, we have a flexible working arrangement anyway, and I think there's probably going to be a few more requests from team members to actually work at home. But certainly we overcome a lot of the very early issues talking to market participants. Can't access Skype, but we're on Teams. So we certainly, as part of our intelligence now, are gathering what is the best way to actually communicate and how do we have backups available. Thanks, Richard.
Fantastic. Thanks, Michael. And Leighton, last but not least, what's been the Sharesies experience? What's been your experience?
Tried to Command D there. I've got so used to Hangouts rather than Zoom. Everything happens pretty naturally. Look, I think starting from a personal perspective, we had a new baby just before lockdown, so that baby didn't really know life outside our house for the first couple of months, a little boy called Louis. So potentially it was always going to be a bit of a strain or a bit of a blur for us anyway with that on. But I did really appreciate the time to spend with him and my toddler as well. And I think I've definitely changed my views on working from home, and Sharesies has always had a very flexible working culture. We're obviously only 3 years old, and from a tech perspective, very enabled to operate like that, and many of our staff did anyway. I was just not one of them. I've always been a sort of work from the office or not at all type person. But I think that's changed now, and I'd be surprised if I ever go back to working how I was, and we're completely rethinking how we operate at Sharesies. From a professional perspective, I came at this from two worlds. So we have two businesses, one being Sharesies, which has experienced significant growth over the last couple of months. So we have learned to scale up very fast. We're happy for some of the decisions we've made earlier with regards to the tech we'd used. And we've also taken on a lot of responsibility of trying to keep our investors and customers informed and trying, as best as possible to help them make good decisions. On the other side of it, we have a hospitality business, which is a bit of a classic Wellington story, a microbrewery and a couple of bars, which of course experience the world very differently. So I'm also grateful for those two lenses that I've managed to look through. Look, I think most relevant to this is probably the Sharesies conversation today, and I think two big things that have come out is there has been a return of the retail investor. This is a global phenomenon, but certainly New Zealand has followed that, and April was actually the first month ever that retail trading volumes were larger than wholesale, so I think that's extremely interesting. And the second big one being equity has returned as an option for capital raising. New Zealand has been dominated by bond markets for some time now. I think there's probably 3 share purchase plan or an equity raise, capital raising options last year, and I mean we're getting 3 a week at the moment. So we're fascinated by that and what that means as far as giving more and more people opportunities to different types of investment. And then finally, I think what we've been focusing on at Sharesies in such an uncertain time, if I think about it personally, I find the next two years very challenging to think about, a lot of uncertainty. If I think about 10 years, it tends to clear up a little bit, and I can see, I don't think people will not want to travel anymore. I think we'll work out the challenges ahead of us, and we will return to economic growth and all those good things. But what we're trying to focus on at Sharesies is the what we know, and then trying to stress a little bit less about what we don't. So that's really the lens we're coming at it from.
Thanks, Aidan. Just two things to pick up, and just picking up a point Jeremy made. Through COVID, life and death continued on, right? It happened for us in our families, in our teams, in our businesses. It's not like life stopped, life continued on. And I guess my question back to you, Leighton, just with your team and with a very personal joy of having, a child just prior to lockdown, how did you, how did you support your people as they went through like all their personal changes as we kind of headed into lockdown and so on?
Yeah, I mean, I think we always tried to be a little bit ahead of the curve. In fact, one of the people in our COVID crisis team came up with a 4-step phase a couple of days before the government did. Actually, I don't know if they if they were into that, but the first thing was trying to acknowledge how real it was right from the start. The second thing, and particularly important for our business, I think, was acknowledging that it was a health crisis first, not an economic one. When you're dealing with investment markets, riding the ups and downs of those, it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking everyone is worried about what their investments are doing. And the reality is that is not what this event was about. I mean, it's been said lots of times that it was it wasn't a financial, it wasn't a structural crisis or anything like that, like previous large market events. It really was a health crisis. So we took it from that lens and looked to support our teams any way as possible. And the key thing that was keeping communications open. We focused a lot on trying to keep people connected. So, and to be honest, throughout, I mean, I would say that sums up my job. Between making sure that we could continue to grow and the core things I had to worry about, like ensuring we had capital to meet our regulatory requirements and stuff. Outside of that, 99% of my day was making sure the team was checked in on and spending time with them over video conference and creating this feeling of connectedness. And I can't remember who even said it, but physical distancing was what we changed the terms to over social distancing. So we tried to make these social interactions happen, and I think that was really important. But look, I mean, I know people that it was a huge struggle for, particularly those who are working, our hospitality employees. Interestingly, Sharesies was in a position where we were continuing to grow, so we didn't have that job uncertainty problem for staff, although there were lots of other sort of social problems. The hospitality interesting was quite different. Every phone call they received from our managers, they thought was going to be the one that was the job over, and that was quite a heartbreaking experience to go through. And no matter how often we tried to assure them that they would be our sort of priority and that we were in a good position to get through this, it was harder for them to see, I guess. So it's a long-winded answer to say, look, it was just people first the whole way through. And I mean, it's how we try to run our business anyway, but it really came to the forefront over the last few weeks.
So, and I think that's the key point, right? And we might just segue now to Jeremy. In the end, the values of an organization, the values when you're in crisis and under pressure really come to the fore, don't they, Jeremy? You might need to come off mute if you can. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and we'd luckily had been through a values exercise last year, and the one of the principal values that we adopted was waka eke noa, which is we're all in this together and paddling in the same canoe, and that's obviously been picked up as part of the team of 5 million approach and more broadly in New Zealand. So that is what we tried to live with. And I mean, Leighton was absolutely right. A lot of it was not about making sure that we were maintaining physical but not social distancing. So in my team, we had both of our morning sort of Kanban sessions sort of virtually with the whole team on video conference, but then made sure we also had a sort of a end of the day 5 o'clock banter session as well. So plus as many sort of touch points as you can throughout the day. And I think it's really interesting the difference that adding video to the equation compared to, say, just audio, picking up the phone and giving people instructions, it does actually collapse some of those distances quite dramatically. And I think that's something that in terms of user experience for fintech products and things, I think we'll see some more of, whether it's actual interacting with actual humans or virtual humans as well. I think it's just building those connections across a distance, even if it is done digitally.
So just picking that one, Jeremy, James, I go to you. The question around digital capability, we were talking about it before we came on. It feels like everyone's been on this massive learning curve, and we're now feeling like we're a bit at the other end and going, well, actually we've got the luxury of a bit of choice now. Well, what's your sense of the pick-up rate, the take-up rate, and ultimately how New Zealand's business behaviours and activities will change?
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, and we've already mentioned the fact that we were sort of given this opportunity in effect to change the way that we actually modelled and did our business. Speaking to people before lockdown, and you asked them the simple question, "How busy are you?" I mean, generally everybody would answer, "Very busy." The weird thing is when you go into then a digital context, we're even busier still, because you no longer have to take a flight down to Wellington, jump in the taxi to go and meet the team at Sharesies. You literally just go Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Blue Jeans, and you can spend 8 or 9 hours doing webinars and meetings and catch ups and so forth. So I suppose where we were is we became more connected. I think that the remoteness actually wasn't a barrier, to Jeremy's point, because you can actually do this. You still get a little of that facial connectivity and the body response and the body language of how people are really feeling. And I think you can see that maybe more in a remote possibility, because some people don't like remote working in terms of they feel maybe a little bit more isolated. They need that engagement. You've got kids running around. We've seen people obviously with cats and babies and dogs and all sorts of stuff. But equally, that flips it around the other way and actually makes things a little bit more relaxed, because it is what it is. It's not a big deal. We're not doing anything we shouldn't be. Let's just tongue in cheek, let's just get on with it. But I think where we move to the future is the recognition that a lot of businesses through this have realized that actually they can either maintain their output, their productivity, or for a lot of organizations, and Leighton's already brought this up, they actually can be more productive. And that sort of brings you back to the conversation that, yes, it was a forced situation, but organizations may want to now consider actually sitting down with their teams and their employees and saying, right, how did it work for you? What did it actually feel like? Did you enjoy the remoteness? Do you want a partial remote working flexibility arrangement? And work through all of the parameters that we've seen, and Jeremy's already mentioned, Christine, when Perpetual Guardian did their pilot trial, they've now adopted it BAU 2 years in. All around the world, people are challenging what was considered the norm. We're now in, let's call it normal 2.0. And I think actually from an employee engagement, health and well-being, if we still want to call it the work-life balance, but maybe it's the future of work, all of those things can only be a good thing as long as we don't rush back to just doing what we were doing before. And I think that New Zealand, we were and are one of the countries that have got out of this first. So let's use that momentum as a catalyst to figure out what the new could actually look like. And I think we're well placed to do that.
Certainly,
Sorry,
just
Michael,
picking
you
up
go.
on a point there that James has raised. It's certainly a lot of the tone of the conversation that we've heard when talking to market participants is how they're potentially reviewing their strategy moving forward. So there's the looking at, do I need a large floor plate in an office that I'm operating at the moment? What sort of packages can I actually wrap around my own team members? So talking about those people maybe working from home by themselves as opposed to actually working with a family. So I think it really has gone through and advanced our future ways of thinking and certainly working.
Michael, do you reckon it changes the way regulation and the role of the regulator, given that the nature of businesses and work may shift in terms of the way the FMA thinks about the work that they do, to encourage stuff or to discourage stuff?
Yeah, look, I certainly, during this period of time, we became a lot more active during COVID-19. So we had very regular outreach programs to insurers, MIS managers, KiwiSaver providers, and we certainly went through and utilised technology to its nth degree. We weren't having to jump in a taxi and travel somewhere. So I think, our actual contact increased. And certainly I'd have a look at, who we contacted. It was a lot more broader, but also our responses to the market, I think, certainly were a lot more efficient. We have a look, as I said earlier, with our COVID-19 landing page and some of the reg relief parcels that we actually put into the market. But certainly, role of regulator remains remains the same. Our observation, certainly during this time of heightened technology, is, as we've written previously, increased risks of cyber threat. And certainly every participant we talk to certainly raised, look, I'm noticing more potential phishing scams or hacking, etc. We're also having to go through an advanced comms to our own staff about just some simple messages. Don't click on every link that comes in if you don't know about it, as an example.
Leighton, I want to open up the conversation around your comment around investors have almost refound favour in the equity markets and so on. And Michael, I might then come back to you in light of the KiwiSaver initiatives that the FMA has been running. Leighton, just paint the picture. It seems like you and others have had phenomenal growth over the last 4 months. Paint the picture. How phenomenal? Why? What's actually happening? What's happening with consumer behaviour right now?
Yeah, well, the picture. So we're sitting at about 170,000 investors on the platform now. Right now, and we came into, so start of March, we're about 95,000. So Sharesies turned 3 in the last 8 days, so we've been sort of doing 25% month-to-month growth. In terms of daily volumes traded through the platform, so far today we're approaching 27 or 28 million Sharesies, primarily long in the market. We're primarily buyers of shares. That's by nature of our customer base. It's always been the case. So, I mean, that's obviously huge growth, and that flows through, unsurprisingly, I guess, to our revenues, the amount of headcount we need operationally. We onboarded about 10 to 15 people during lockdown. We're currently hiring another 16 at the moment. We also raised capital to make sure that, for those unfamiliar, we are a fully licensed participant, also clearing and trading broker of the NZX. So with that comes some reasonably tight obligations, rightly so, but those tend to be based on volatility of markets, and of course markets being very volatile, so our margin requirements and the amount of money we have to hold as a company to support our investors at the moment it is actually got up to some quite large numbers. So hopefully that gives you an idea on the growth. With regards to behaviour of some of these investors, contrary to popular belief, even we were on News Hub at the 6 p.m. bulletin on Sunday, and the customer they chose was someone who talked a lot about day trading, and that does not make up the majority of our customer base. So over 90% of the people surveyed in the last month consider themselves to be long-term investing. Long-term investing means with a 10-year horizon, which is something that we've always advocated for anyway. That's not to say we don't have day traders on the platform and things like that. But yeah, as a large base, the awakening has been it's accessible for the first time. Because the risk seems so comparatively low when you can do it with $100 as opposed to $5,000. And we always knew in Sharesies' case, for example, that our brand reach was far greater than our customer reach of that 95,000. We knew if you spoke with people, there's a good chance they knew who Sharesies was, but probably weren't a customer still. And of course, what the lockdown brought for a lot of applications like Sharesies, internationally investing and otherwise, was time to get round to that thing that you wanted to get round to. So regardless of what was happening with markets, Sharesies was one of those things that people wanted to get round to.
Fantastic. That's pretty phenomenal growth to try and manage. Michael, obviously the FMA has got a very keen eye on what's happening in consumer and investor land, particularly in KiwiSaver. And last week, obviously there's a sway of change coming through, but you've gone very much into the consumer space with the launch of a few initiatives. Well, what's your read on what's happening with consumer behaviour through this COVID process?
Take that off mute. So certainly one of our focuses with our calls to KiwiSaver providers was making sure that they're actually been able to respond to consumers and their queries. So looking at capacity. Interesting enough, certainly during this time, we saw the advent of a lot more chatbots and digital responses, which was certainly positive and very, very pleasing. Obviously, as you know, the KiwiSaver statements are certainly changing, and we've taken, I guess, had a lot of learnings from consumers about how we should also communicate. So you will see there's a lot more use of digital mediums and case studies certainly on our website as well, as opposed to just above a line standard certainly print media. But look, overall, if I reflect back and think of a lot of the MIS managers and KiwiSaver providers that we talk to, they certainly really stepped up their game with communicating, and really went through and pushed digital channels and made sure that they certainly serve the needs of their consumers well.
Because James, that's probably one of the big things that's changed, right? The way and the frequency of which entities connect, communicate, guide, advise their consumers and potential ones. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think Michael's point, is very valid. I mean, if you think about KiwiSaver, and one of my old neighbours in her early 70s, basically like a number of people panicked and withdrew, thinking about retiring at the end of the year, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, COVID, what's going to happen? Because she saw, a sort of a decrease. And that's the thing, it's having the information readily available, and it's clear and it's articulated in such a way that the broad spectrum of the people that interact with these products actually fully understand the implications of a particular move or a decision that they actually decide to make. Because making that in your early 20s as opposed to making it in your 70s can have obviously very different impact, especially on your retirement plans. But I think the connectivity piece is actually a really good thing. I think we are more connected now than we ever have. We've always said, as New Zealanders, we are a small nation. We, one removed from everybody else. But this has definitely brought it to the light. The ability now to actually engage and bring people into forums such as this, not just in New Zealand, but around the world. People are now more eager. Speaking to a VC firm in the US, I mean, the gentleman there said, look, in the olden days, I used to travel like 100 days out of the year and spending considerable time away from his family and his kids. Now that he's been introduced to things like Zoom, he's like, what's the point? I can just jump on the line, I'll jump on the call, and I can get the exact same things I need through the conversation and the questionings that I would if I was actually in the room with that particular person or that particular company. And I think that's going to be the adoption of even some cultures. If we look at Asia is very much boots on the ground, shake the hand, eyeball the person for the deal to be done. A little bit of a generalization. That isn't going to be the case for some time to come. So the digital framework, the digital allowance, the digital acceptance, the digital adoption, these are all things that we're going to have to continue to embrace, continue to educate, and then continue to adopt into this, this new landscape that we now find ourselves in.
Yeah, awesome. Jeremy, I'm going to segue to you if I can. And this is around the opportunity for people to jump into this market and always build the thing they've always wanted to build. To Leighton's point, there's money available. There's angel investors available. How big is that opportunity, and what have you seen in the last few months around businesses coming and accelerating, if you like, their plans and coming to market?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on, and there are definitely sources of capital out there. You saw some New Zealand VC firms make a bit of a splash around we're still open for business during lockdown. So Movac, for example, made some investments and publicised the fact, as they should, to show that there were still people out there with checkbooks open. We still have a substantial pot of government money coming down through the venture capital space, through the Elevate program, through New Zealand Growth Capital Partners, formerly NZVIF, which is working through a process of getting those managers appointed to actually invest those funds. I mean, one part of my work is setting up VC and private equity funds, and we've had a bit of a wave where we currently have 3 or 4 different private funds being put together to come into the market at the moment, and that's just us. Obviously, there are ways of raising equity capital through crowdfunding and just generally through the angel markets that are still there. So I think money is not the issue. I think good ideas are there or need to be developed, and if they are good, can find funding. I think a lot of people are taking the opportunity, and people, I think, are realizing that they need to take the opportunity. So I had some involvement with Manaki, which was the website set up by Andy Hamilton, formerly the Ice House, as a resource for SMEs and small businesses during lockdown and COVID. So basically a Q&A where you could be put together with experts in various fields. And one of the things that Manaki did was do a partnership with Swiftly to provide 1,003 free websites to businesses that needed to get online during lockdown. So I think everyone realizes that you need to be where the people are, and going forward that will be increasingly online. And then I think it's really about those businesses that take it to the next level, whether through use of AI or other technologies, to actually provide an enhanced and simple user experience. And I'm happy to give, as always, a shout out to Sharesies. I did use the time during lockdown to finally get my family, so my wife and my 3 kids, all to open accounts. We couldn't enroll the dog. We need to talk later about those anti-dog qualification policies, which admittedly I may have put in the terms and conditions originally. But the ease with which I was able to actually explain to my 17-year-old, 16-year-old, and 9-year-old, also named Louis, good name, Leighton, about how they could actually use this and navigate around it. My 9-year-old was very pleased to be able to buy some Burger Fuel shares, so I think that's going to do well for him. There is only opportunity there, and it won't be lack of both support within the community. We like to help each other out generally in New Zealand, so there are plenty of resources like Manaki or other supporters, and there is capital out there, both currently and another sort of segment coming online shortly. I've also been working with Suze Reynolds and the Angel Association, who are actually talking with government at the moment, as you would expect, around the COVID response and stimulus package, because some of the things which have come out to date are not necessarily targeted or useful for startups or fintechs in that space, because it's not that great having a wage subsidy if in fact you're a lean team that doesn't have a lot of workers. You really might need capital to just support day-to-day burn costs and extend your runway. So those conversations are ongoing, and I expect we'll see more announcements in that space.
That's great, Jeremy. Thank you. I might, Leighton, go to you, and then we might do a wrap, folks. Leighton, does a business like Sharesies, who've founded on the sweat of hard work, you're not an overnight success. You folks have been working hard for many years on this idea, but it feels like there's huge momentum. Are you folks already on your next idea, and the idea after that is that how it kind of plays out, that there's gaps in the market, needs in the marketplace, that you're a successful startup, you're now maturing beyond that very early stage, that you're now looking at other opportunities? And the other part of that question is, and this is just to the people who are changing jobs or in if you like, more traditional sectors, is there an opportunity to retrain, find people who maybe were doing A but now can do B? How does that play in your thinking when you're hiring people?
Yeah, so the first one is we've got Sharesies' purpose is to create the most empowered generation, financially empowered generation. And our vision is to create the same opportunities with money for someone with $5 as $500,000. So those are both very broad statements and encompass a whole lot of opportunity, and more opportunity than we've ever had time for. We're focusing on 3 things as a strategy. So one is access, which I guess you could say is what we spent a lot of time doing at the moment. We've built the NZX shares, and that's now accessible with 1 cent. We're going to have US shares accessible with 1 cent very soon. We'll do another market immediately after that, and access will be achieved by Sharesies. Like, I'm really confident that sometime in the next few years there won't be a problem around access. That's one of the great things, democratization and that technology is enabling. The other two strategy pillars are much harder. That's confidence and motivation. And we sort of consider those two to be our life's work, I guess, and that is our business model going forward. So how can we create confidence with investors and say, well, look, you can access it with 1 cent, but how do I know that it's right for me, and how do I know I'm making the right decisions? So we're really trying to lean into that stuff at the moment and invest in that. And then the other side being motivation. So now that I've got the confidence and the access, what actually this makes me decide I'm going to do this over something else that I could do with my money. Yeah, I guess what's very nice from the position we're in now, and I mean, we were getting there anyway, to be honest. Like, we were seeing really nice, we've basically seen 10% month-to-month growth since we started Sharesies, which is not an insignificant number. And obviously that has accelerated in the last 3 months materially. And what that's given us opportunity is to re-look at how fast we could grow, and we say no to so many things at Sharesies. There's so many things we'd like to do for people and for our business, and now we're thinking, hey, maybe we don't have to leave all those opportunities on the table anymore. So we're looking at how we invest further into that. We take our the size we're at and the growth we've got, and the fact that we've largely done that with very little operational headcount. Most of our headcount is developer, design, sort of product focused resource, and how we capitalize more on those. So and have really significant runway behind us to do that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but to say yes, we think there's a heap of opportunity ahead of us.
That's great. Yeah. The question about people, and then we're going to whip around in a closing comment. The piece around people, retraining people who might have been doing.
Look, so when we hire, there is no one at Sharesies who would say they were an investments market expert before starting at Sharesies, and we think that's hugely valuable. And people, sometimes if people fall into traps, it's maybe trying to fit themselves to a job beforehand. But how we look at it is we value problem solving over anything else, problem solving and learning. And if people can show to us in a good cover letter that they understand what we're here to do, which is our purpose, our vision, and what our values are, and that they've got some good examples of how they've learned new things and solved problems, which every human in the world does, by the way, then that tends to be enough. And sometimes I think just, not putting any more pressure on yourself and walking into a room and knowing what you know and showing people what you know, a little bit like what I said, actually focus on what you know rather than trying to understand what you don't, then that goes a really long way, and ultimately genuine people win. And I will say it's an extremely competitive job environment. We're getting 100 plus applications, and most of our jobs aren't staying up for more than a week at the moment. So it's like, what is that thing that can set you apart? And it has to happen in the cover letter. So invest in that, and then focusing on what you know and not, and then I think that will ring true. And then to be honest, there's a little bit of luck involved too. But if you apply for enough, luck will come through.
Fantastic. Good guidance for all those kids and those people out there that are looking for career change. Folks, we're going to wrap. James, I will ask you to pick up the tertiary connectivity piece that you just referred to. Question for everyone in closing. In 2 to 3 years' time, given the conversation that we've just had, where do we think we are as a New Zealand community with our take-up of technology, our work patterns and behaviours, and obviously the resumption of the normal life that we all love to crave? James, I might start with you and then go, Michael, to you, Jeremy finally, and then off to Leighton.
I think we'll see a massive shift towards flexible working. We will no longer see people having careers. There'll be a lot of, I think with people will have almost a career portfolio where they'll do 2 or 3 different jobs at varying things. To Leighton's point, we'll see people come in and people leave very much more quickly, and some of that will be remote. And I mean remote, not necessarily here based in New Zealand. They'll just work on a project from somewhere in the world. And I think actually the whole productivity around New Zealand from an OECD digital literacy perspective that Kendall's trying to do with Banker, and the digital capability, I think, will actually increase significantly. And it's the people on this call that will actually make that happen. So associations, regulatory, and people like Leighton and his business who've got the sort of the foresight and the endurance to actually sort of take these new products and new solutions to market. And obviously then we can help create the conversation around that. So I think in closing for me, shame it's been a global pandemic to bring us to this point, but some of the success, the agility that we've shown as an industry tech sector, I think capitalise on that, move forward, get a lot more great products and solutions out to a global market day one. It's no longer test and learn in New Zealand and then think about new markets. Let's go global day one. And certainly Michael is part of the FMA, and then even leading into the FCA and the Global Financial Innovation Network. Again, lots of great opportunities there. So thanks for having us. It's been a great discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, James. Jeremy.
I think over the next 3 years, it would be good to see us take the lessons learned during lockdown in relation to how we can use technology and actually expand and grow that. It'll be very interesting to see how much there is a drift back to what life was before now that we're in level 1. And I think that's to be resisted. So I think those of us who are employers and founders and involved in businesses need to actually be open to hearing the lessons of our staff and how they want to work. And I think there's a lot to be learned and still developed in relation to technology and how technology, for example, could be used to allow New Zealand financial services businesses to export some of those services overseas, which is an area where the law and the regulatory situation does not necessarily make it easier. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done in terms of globalization of rules and standards. And, I'd also like to see that tied in with simplification. So if you actually want to democratize financial services, you need to make them easy to understand, both at an economic and financial level, but also, the legal sort of wraparound and the terms and conditions and things around them. We need to start finding new innovative ways to get that across to people, which are not long lists of words in more or less sensible order, even if they are well written. So I think there's a lot to do and a lot to keep us all busy over the next period.
Awesome, thank you. And Michael?
Look, it's certainly go through and agree with the statements from James and Jeremy. I guess my only cautionary note was, and as mentioned this previously, was cyber resilience, and hoping that certainly firms do invest into systems, into making sure that they are robust, and they certainly go through and protect customer outcomes and meet expectations. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Michael. And Leighton, last word to you. 3 years' time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Richard, and thanks everyone for the great chat today. Look, I think 3 years isn't that much of a long time, really, is it? But I guess I've got a few hopes. One is that we really do invest in good infrastructure as a country, and we invest in good technology. And I think that that's my personal view on what will carry us through this, and a good way of spending money, because we will need to spend money as a country. And I guess from a more social lens, there's a lot going on. I think it's worth acknowledging the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's going on in the States at the moment, and that New Zealand is certainly not immune to that type of racism and stuff, if not so in your face as what it can be over in the US. But ultimately, I hope for a more equal world, and I hope that's all considered as we look to the options of growing the economy and getting ourselves back on the feet over the next 3 years. And ideally, we'd come out in a world where those opportunities are available to everyone, and maybe this wealth gap is starting to narrow a little bit, because it's been going the wrong way for some time, and I think it is the cause of a lot of macro tension. And I think we've got an opportunity with a hard hit here, maybe, to turn that around. And I guess that's one of the things that I hope we manage over the next 3 years, getting some real traction on that.
Awesome stuff, and that's probably a great conversation for for another webinar. Gentlemen, thank you for your time, for your expertise, and for your insights. Really interesting discussion. You know, I reflect on the fact that, you know, New Zealand, like every other country, had pretty much had the same set of issues, early run numbers on COVID, really clear leadership, really clear strategy, really clear coming together, and we've effectively eliminated COVID. If we apply that kind of capability to any problem that we see in front of us, imagine what we could do. And on that note, let me thank all the people out there in webinar land. Jeremy, thank you for the term. To the panel, thank you for your time. There will be an evaluation form come up in just a moment. So if you want to know more or hear different things, please let us know. We're obviously going to continue on with the FSC Connect platform, but want to make sure it's relevant to level 1 and relevant to the audience. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Cheers for now.